The smell of the lake changes before a storm. Most people wouldn't know that. You have to have spent enough mornings sitting at the end of a dock, lying in the water, not really thinking about anything specific, to notice it. It goes from that cold mineral thing it normally does in early morning, kind of flat and clean, to something slightly richer, earthier. Like the lake is deciding to show you something it keeps hidden the rest of the time. I'm sitting at the end of my dock right now, and the lake smells like that. Except there's no storm coming. The sky is the same pale gray it's been for 3 days, but not storm gray. More like the world just forgot to turn the color up. The water is flat, completely flat, no wind, and that smell is there anyway. I've been thinking about what that means for about 20 minutes. I've also been thinking about the fact that I haven't heard a single boat engine in 9 days. 9 days. On Harrow Lake in October, that's not automatically strange. Summer people are gone. Weekenders get scarce. You stop hearing the weekend bass fishermen dragging their rigs out at 5 in the morning. But even in October, there's the occasional local, the guy checking his tip-ups before they freeze, the retired teacher from Millhaven, doing slow evening circles in his aluminum Lund. There's something. 9 days of nothing is strange, even for October. I pull the line in. The worm that was on the hook at some point is gone. I don't remember when that happened. Across the water, maybe 1.25 miles to the northeast, there's a dark column that was thick and black 2 days ago and is now pale and dispersed. Whatever was burning over there near Pellin Road burned itself out. I know Pellin Road. I've driven it 100 times to get to the hardware store in Weston Falls. There's a gas station at the corner where it meets Route 9, a feed store, 3 or 4 houses set back in the trees. One of those houses burned, probably. Maybe the gas station, which would be bad in a different way, the kind of bad that sends a plume like that. I'm not going to drive out and check. I haven't driven anywhere in 23 days. The radio is on inside. I can just hear it through the screen door. The shortwave, not the CB. The CB has been mostly static and fragments for 2 weeks, but occasionally someone comes through on channel 19, usually in the middle of the night, saying things that are either deliberate warnings or just people panicking into a microphone, and I've stopped trying to separate the two. The shortwave is better for actual information, or was. There's still a signal out of somewhere in Ohio. A man with a very flat Midwestern voice, who gives what he calls situation updates every 6 hours on the hour. I don't know his name. I've started thinking of him as Ohio because that's all I've got. Ohio said this morning that the National Guard has stopped responding in 17 states. He listed them. New York was on the list. He said that with the same flat affect he uses to report everything else, like he was reading weather. I bring the line in the rest of the way and wrap it around the spool, and sit there another minute looking at the opposite shore. The trees are starting to turn, red maples first, then the birches going yellow. From out here on the island, it looks exactly like it always looks this time of year. Somebody painted a picture called October and hung it on every side of the island. The only thing that doesn't fit is that pale smear where the smoke was, fading now into the gray sky. And the quiet. I've been living on this island for 4 months. Before that, I was coming out every weekend for 6 years. Longer than some people stay in marriages. I know what this quiet usually sounds like. There's a difference. The usual October quiet has texture to it. Geese somewhere, a woodpecker in the dead ash across the channel, the distant punctuation of chainsaws as people put their firewood in. This quiet is just absence, like someone pressed a button and removed the audio track. I get up, take the fishing gear back to the shed, and go inside to check the radio. Ohio is telling me that the situation in the upper Midwest is, quote, deteriorating faster than projected. He always says faster than projected, never faster than expected. Projected sounds like someone was watching this from a distance with a clipboard, which I suppose is what he's doing. I make coffee. Real coffee. The last of it. From a can of Folgers that I've been rationing since the 3rd week. After this, it's the instant stuff, which is fine. I'll survive it. I haven't made a list in a few days, so I do that while the water heats on the propane burner. Canned goods. 41 cans of various things. Beans, chicken broth, 2 cans of Spam, 7 cans of corn, 5 cans of tuna, 12 cans of tomatoes, 4 of peaches, 2 of pears, 6 of soup. About 4 weeks if I eat normally. 8 if I stretch it. I know how to stretch it. Rice and dried beans, 30 pounds of rice in sealed buckets, about 12 pounds of dried beans. 3 or 4 months of that alone, more if I supplement with fish. Fish. The lake is full of fish. Yellow perch, largemouth bass, the occasional walleye up from the channel. I've been eating fish every other day since the 3rd week. It helps. Propane. 2 full 20-pound tanks, and one that's about a quarter gone. That's the one on the burner now. I run the burner once in the morning for coffee and cooking, and once in the evening. Cold meals in between. I can stretch the propane to maybe 3 months if I'm careful, longer if I switch to the wood stove earlier in the season, which I should do anyway once it gets to freezing overnight. Firewood. I have about 2 cords stacked under the lean-to on the north side of the cabin. I cut another cord earlier in the fall before things got strange. Should be enough for the season, maybe more. Water. The hand pump draws from the lake through a filter I built into the intake line. I've also been collecting rain in the 2 50-gallon barrels I keep under the back eave, and those are both full right now from last week. The lake water I filter and then boil to be safe, which costs propane, which is why the rain barrels matter. Power. 2 200-watt solar panels on the roof feed a battery bank that runs the lights, the radio, and charges the small electronics. Not a huge system, but enough. No grid, obviously. Never was. Medical. First aid kit. Antibiotics I got from the mainland 3 weeks ago on my last run. Ibuprofen and acetaminophen. Antibiotic ointment. A roll of suture strips. 2 ace bandages. 1 bottle of betadine. A half-full bottle of amoxicillin I was given last year for a tooth abscess that went away before I finished it. Weapons. 308 bolt action with a scope, about 180 rounds. 9mm pistol, 77 rounds. I also have a tomahawk-style hatchet that I use more as a tool than anything else, and a hunting knife that I keep sharp enough to shave with, though I don't shave with it. That's the inventory. I know it by heart. I update it in my head every morning, the way some people check their phones. The coffee finishes. I pour it, and sit in the chair by the window that faces south, and look out over the water. I should probably explain how I got here. Not here on the island. I've been coming here since before the paint was dry on the cabin. How I ended up being the kind of person who was already positioned for this, which is a strange thing to call it. Positioned. Like I was doing this on purpose. I wasn't doing it on purpose. I was just doing it. My name is Ray Corbin. I'm 41 years old. For most of my adult life, I've been a carpenter. The kind that does custom work. Furniture, cabinetry, timber framing, the occasional full house build. I'm good at it. I know I'm good at it. The way you know something about a skill that's been in your hands long enough to feel like part of your body. I can look at a piece of wood and know what it wants to be. That sounds strange. It isn't, if you've done it long enough. I grew up in a small town in Vermont, which maybe explains some of this. Not the apocalypse, the island, the preference for having water between me and other people. Vermont towns are small in a particular way that teaches you the value of space, without anyone ever saying that's what they're teaching you. You learn it from the geography. Mountains make people quiet. Rivers make people careful. I moved around in my 20s. Boston for a while, worked for a contractor outside of Albany, then drifted north again because I always drift north. I don't know why. By the time I was 33, I was doing custom work for myself out of a workshop I rented in a town called Covell, 20-some miles south of Harrow Lake. Good work, steady clients, enough money that I wasn't worried about it, a life that fit well enough. But I was always going to end up at the lake. I found the island by accident. 6 years ago, I was hired to build a dock for a summer cabin owner on the north shore of Harrow Lake, and while I was out there measuring one afternoon, I noticed the island. It's about half a mile offshore from the north end, separated from the nearest point by about 400 meters of open water. Maybe 2 acres, maybe a little more. covered in pine and birch, a rocky shoreline on the north and east, a gentler gravel beach on the south side where the dock sits now. The real estate records showed it was owned by a timber company that had harvested it once in the 80s and then lost interest. Nobody lived on it. Nobody visited it, as far as I could tell. I spent 3 weekends paddling around it before I did anything else, just looking. The first weekend I walked the perimeter twice and found that the high ground in the center was dry and flat and had good southern exposure. The second weekend I brought a notebook and took measurements and sketched out what a small cabin would look like up there. The third weekend I brought a shovel and dug test holes for the foundation posts. I bought it from the timber company for $11,000. They seemed surprised anyone wanted it. I seemed surprised they were surprised. It took me 3 summers to build the cabin properly. I didn't rush it. I'd haul materials out in my John boat, lumber, hardware, insulation, windows, roofing, and spend the weekends building. Framed it in timber, rough cut from a local mill, the kind of construction that's designed to outlast whoever builds it. I mortised and tenoned the major joints without metal fasteners, because I could, and because I wanted to see if I still had it in me. I did. The finished cabin is small, about 400 square feet on the main floor, with a sleeping loft above that adds maybe another 150. Living area and kitchen combined, a wood stove in the corner, propane range for cooking, the hand pump for water, a covered porch that faces south and gets sun most of the day, the shed out back for tools and storage, the dock. I don't have neighbors out here. The nearest house on shore is a summer place about 600 meters to the east that's closed up for the season. There's a public boat launch about 1.5 miles down the north shore, but it's gated after Labor Day. In summer, there are boats on the lake most weekends. By October, I have the whole thing more or less to myself. That suited me. I should be clear about something. I'm not someone who came out here because the world traumatized me. I'm not running from a bad divorce, or a grief that broke me, or some event that made other people unbearable. I just genuinely prefer this. I prefer the quality of time that exists when there's nothing competing for your attention. I prefer the sound of the lake over traffic or television. I prefer the specificity of problems out here. This board needs replacing. This line needs mending. This roof pitch needs checking before the snow, over the vague, ambient problems of ordinary life that never quite resolve. I have friends. I have a sister in Burlington who I talk to every couple of weeks. I go into town for supplies and stay to have a beer with people sometimes, and it's fine. It's genuinely fine. I just don't need it the way some people do. That preference, that particular wiring, is the only reason I'm alive right now. Because when the first reports started coming out of upstate New York and western Massachusetts and 3 counties in Connecticut about quarantine zones and unexplained attacks and hospitals at capacity, my first instinct wasn't to drive toward anything. My first instinct was to make sure I had enough food and then wait for things to clarify. That instinct saved me. I'm almost certain of it. The first time I heard something that seemed wrong was a Tuesday. I remember because I was replacing a section of decking on the dock, and I had the radio on in the shed, with the door open so I could hear it while I worked. The news program I was half listening to cut away from whatever it was covering, I think something about a coastal storm, to mention that 3 hospitals in Hartford, Connecticut had declared internal emergencies due to patient overflow from bite-related injuries. The reporter sounded like he was reading something he found mildly interesting, rather than alarming. Bite injuries, he said, were being described as, quote, unusually severe, and in some cases inconsistent with animal attack patterns. Authorities were investigating. I kept working. I don't know exactly why that detail caught a small hook in the back of my head. Bite injuries don't usually make the news unless it's a shark story. The fact that it was in 3 hospitals simultaneously, and that they were calling them inconsistent with animal attacks, that wasn't right. That was a specific kind of wrong. 2 days later, there were similar reports from Albany and a town in western Massachusetts, and something had happened in a subway station in Philadelphia that the authorities were describing with a lot of words that added up to very little information. I drove to Weston Falls and bought everything I could fit in the truck bed. $200 of canned goods, 50 pounds of dried beans, 40 pounds of rice, all the propane I could carry, extra butane lighters, matches, a box of first aid supplies. The hardware store was on my route anyway, so I stopped and got 50 feet of heavy gauge chain, 2 combination padlocks, and 4 concrete anchor bolts. The woman at the register gave me a look, not an unfriendly one, the kind of look that says she's thinking something she's too polite to say. I also stopped at the sporting goods store that sits between the laundromat and the auto parts place and bought 3 boxes of .308 and 2 boxes of 9mm. I've been shooting since I was 12. I don't own guns because I think I'll need them. I own them the way you own a good set of wrenches. They're tools. You have them because you know how to use them, and someday a job will require them. I got back to the island that evening, made 2 trips with the John boat, hauled everything up the dock path and stacked it in the shed. Then I went back to work on the dock. Over the next week, the reports got louder. Albany went into a partial lockdown that the governor called a precautionary quarantine. There were fires in a suburb of Boston. Something was happening in Buffalo that the local news channels kept describing, with footage of empty streets and police lights strobing off building fronts. The Hartford hospitals stopped giving updates. My sister called on day 4. She said she was thinking about coming to stay with me for a while, and I said that was probably a good idea. She called again the next day and said things in Burlington were still fine, and she was going to wait and see. I said okay. She called the day after that and said a friend's husband who worked in law enforcement had told her friend something over dinner that she didn't want to say on the phone. I said, come now. She said she would call me in the morning. She never called in the morning. I tried to call her 3 times over the next 2 days and got voicemail. Then the cell service dropped entirely. I've been thinking about my sister every day since. I'm not going to talk about that more than that right now. By the time the cell service went down, I had already decided I wasn't going to the mainland. The decision didn't feel momentous. It felt practical. The information coming through the radio was pointing very clearly in one direction, and that direction was, stay where you are, if where you are is defensible. A lake island with food and water and shelter is about as defensible as it gets without being underground. I anchored the John boat off the backside of the island, and I locked the chain around the dock cleats, and I pulled the canoe up into the trees and covered it with brush, and I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and listened to Ohio on the shortwave. I've been doing that for 23 days. There's something I should describe for you, because it matters to understanding what it's like out here. The island isn't just a place I came to survive. It's a place I built. I know every inch of it in the specific way you can only know something you've put your hands into repeatedly. The cabin sits about 60 feet back from the south shore, on a slight rise, maybe 8 feet above water level. From the porch you can see across to the south shore of the lake, the tree line interrupted in a couple of places by the roof lines of vacation cabins. From the loft window you can see north, over the canopy, out toward the open part of the lake. On clear days, you can see the ridge above Weston Falls, about 4 miles off. I haven't been able to see it lately because of the haze. The dock is my primary concern now. It's 24 feet long, bolted to 4 concrete piers I sank myself, and it's solid enough to park a truck on. Not that that matters. What matters is that it's the only place anything can land easily. The rest of the island shoreline is rock shelving or gravel beach with ankle-twisting footing, and the water deepens fast. Someone coming from shore would have to know where the dock is and would have to have a boat capable of getting here. I've started thinking about that differently lately. Last week I took one of my extra lengths of timber framing stock and lashed it as a crossbar between 2 dock posts at the inshore end, about 30 inches above the deck. Not enough to stop someone from getting over it if they really wanted to, but enough to slow them down and enough to let me hear the sound of something walking into it in the dark. I also hung a length of chain with 3 canning jar lids loosely threaded on it from the crossbar. In the wind, it's annoying. In still air, anything touching it makes noise. I've been doing things like that. Small adjustments. Not panicking. I don't feel like panicking specifically, but just improving the geometry of the place. Making it harder to approach quietly. Making it easier for me to know where things are at 2 in the morning, without turning on a light. The solar system powers one interior LED strip, one reading lamp, and the radios. I've stopped running the light strip except for an hour each evening. The reading lamp I use under a blanket over the loft windows so it doesn't show from shore. The principle being that the island should look unoccupied from a distance. I don't know how well that works. There's smoke from my chimney in the mornings when I run the wood stove. But smoke at dawn from an island nobody's paying attention to is easy to miss. I've been thinking about the wood stove smoke more lately. I might need to switch to a propane setup that vents differently, or just learn to cook without hot meals until after dark, when the smoke won't show against the light. Probably I'm overthinking this. Probably there's nobody out there watching. Probably. Day 27. I know it's 27 because I've been scratching marks into the doorframe the way they do in movies about prison. It started as a joke to myself and became a habit, and now it's just data. 4 vertical lines and a diagonal slash for every 5 days, plus the 2 remaining on the current group. 27 marks. It rained last night and the rain barrels are overflowing, which is good. But it's also the kind of cold rain that gets into your joints if you let it. The kind that's telling you winter is thinking about showing up early. I spent the morning in the shed oiling every tool I own. It's the kind of thing you do when you need to feel useful, but the weather won't let you outside without getting soaked. Ohio this morning reported that the situation in the eastern seaboard states was, quote, largely outside the scope of organized response. That's new language from him. He usually says, deteriorating faster than projected. Largely outside the scope of organized response. Sounds like someone trying to describe the fact that there is no organized response, without quite saying it. He also said that isolated rural communities, with defensible perimeters and sustainable food sources, should, quote, maintain current protocols. I would like to know what he thinks I'm doing out here, but there's no way to reach him. The CB crackled last night around midnight. I've gotten into the habit of sleeping with it on a low volume. There was a woman's voice, very faint, coming in and out of static. She said something about Millhaven, which is a town I know. It's about 18 miles south along the Lake Road. She said it twice. Then something that might have been a number or a name. Then static. I sat up and listened for another 45 minutes, but that was it. Millhaven is on the south end of Harrow Lake. If that woman was in Millhaven and she was using a CB, she was either still there or had recently left. That's the closest thing to a local situation report I've gotten since all of this started. I'm trying not to think too hard about what she was doing in Millhaven, or what was happening around her when she was saying it. On day 30, I catch something that changes my understanding of the situation along the shoreline, and it changes it fast. I'm on the north end of the island, up in the birches where I've got the best sight line across to the far shore. I come up here sometimes with my binoculars to check the boat launch, which is still gated, but visible from here, and the stretch of road that follows the north shore for about a mile before turning up into the hills. I come up here because I think information is better than no information, and this is the highest point on the island. What I see this morning is something walking along the far shoreline, below the road level where the bank drops to the water. Walking wrong. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Walking the way a person walks when they've forgotten that walking requires intention. Head slightly forward of the torso, pace irregular, stopping for no visible reason, and then resuming. I've seen this before, only in people who are very drunk or very sick. From across the lake, through binoculars, I can't make out any detail except the general shape of a person and the wrongness of the movement. It walks along the water's edge for maybe 200 meters. Then it stops, stands there. From this distance, I can't tell if it's looking at anything specific. Then it wades into the lake. I watch this through the binoculars, and I am aware of my hands tightening around the barrel. It wades in up to its knees, then its waist. The water is cold, October cold, somewhere in the low 50s, and it doesn't react to the temperature at all. No hesitation, no pause. No sign of the shock that cold water gives a body, just continued moving forward until the water is at chest level. Then it stopped, just stood there, chest deep in Harrow Lake, about 40 meters from shore, with the island visible behind it. I stayed up in the birches for over an hour, watching. The thing stayed in the water the entire time, not swimming, not moving much, just standing, occasionally turning at the waist, slow, like a compass needle drifting. I don't think it could see the island from there. I don't know what it could perceive at that distance, but I didn't move. I didn't make any noise. I sat in those birches with the binoculars and watched and thought about the fact that this thing didn't respond to cold water and what that meant for the channel between the far shore and my island. 400 meters. That's the distance from the nearest point of the mainland to my dock. I don't know how deep 400 meters of lake bottom is going to be to something that doesn't stop walking because it's cold or running out of air. The water depth in the main channel between the island and the north shore averages about 30 feet, deeper in spots. That ought to be enough. Something standing upright on the bottom, even if it keeps walking, would need to cover ground for a long time, and it would drift in current, and it wouldn't know which direction the island was. Ought to be enough. I'm going to have to believe that for now. When I come back down the hill to the cabin, I start looking at the perimeter of the island differently. I start thinking about the gravel beach on the south side, where the water is only waist deep for about 20 feet out. I start thinking about the rock ledges on the east face, where someone could theoretically walk from the water onto dry land without using the dock at all. I spend that afternoon moving things. The canoe goes into the shed, bolted to the wall with a padlock through the seat frame. The John boat, I move from its anchorage behind the island to a spot under the dock, lashed close, with the outboard tilted up so the prop is out of the water. Harder to spot from shore, harder to spot from a distance. I take 3 short sections of 2x6 board and nail them into a low fence across the south beach, above the waterline. Not a real barrier. 2 feet of board across a 20-foot beach isn't stopping anything determined, but it creates a visual tripwire in the dark, and it'll make noise if anything walks into it. Then I sit on the porch with the 308 across my knees and watch the far shore until the light is completely gone and the lake becomes just a sound. Ohio is 3 days silent. I switch between frequencies until my eyes hurt. There's still some activity out there. A voice somewhere in what sounds like French Canadian. A repeating automated signal that's probably a weather beacon of some kind. A stretch of coded sounding transmissions that could be military or ham radio or someone's shortwave alarm clock for all I know. But Ohio, the flat voice with the situation updates every 6 hours, is gone. I sit with that for a day. Then I decide that Ohio being silent means I need other sources, and that means the CB, which means closer range transmissions, which means someone local. I extend the CB antenna wire up through the loft and out onto the roof, using a length of old coaxial I had in the shed, which gets me another 10 feet of height and meaningfully improves the range. That night, I pick up 2 conversations. The first is men's voices, at least 3 of them, talking about someone named Doyle and whether to go back for him. I can't make out enough of the context to know what going back means or where back is. One of them says at some point, clear as anything, there's too many of them on the 9, and I know Route 9 well enough to feel something cold settle in my chest when I hear that. Route 9 is the main road up from the south end of the lake. If Route 9 is compromised, then the town of Millhaven is cut off from the north, and the north is where the state road is, and the state road is the only real evacuation corridor this far up. The second conversation is shorter. A woman and a younger-sounding man talking about a boat. They say the words Harrow Lake specifically. I sit up straighter and turn the squelch down and listen. The woman says they need to move in the next 2 days because the fuel is almost gone. The man says he knows. She asks about the island, and he says he didn't see anything there. It looked empty. She says she thought maybe she saw smoke from it once, but maybe not. He says maybe not. They're talking about my island. I sit with the headphones on for a long time after that conversation drops out. I'm not sure what I feel. Noticed feels wrong. I didn't want to be noticed. Safe feels wrong too, because nothing about what I just heard is actually that. It's more like, I've been out here thinking of myself as the only thing still functioning, and now I'm a data point in someone else's survival calculation. That's a strange reorientation. The woman's voice. The way she said the island. Not accusatory, not fearful. More like she was checking something off a list. I go back to sleep eventually. I don't really sleep. I lie in the loft with my eyes open and think about what it would mean to have other people here, and what it would cost, and what it would give back, and I don't reach any particular conclusion by dawn. Day 34. Cold morning. Frost on the dock planks when I walk out to get the temperature reading from the weather gauge I mounted on the dock post. 31 degrees. The lake isn't frozen. Harrow Lake doesn't typically freeze until January, and this year's been relatively warm, but the surface is doing that thing where it gets very still and flat and slightly dark looking, like the water is conserving heat. I'm frying perch on the propane burner with some dried onion flakes when I hear the engine. I don't hear it through the walls. The wind is coming from the south this morning, and the cabin faces south, but the engine sound is coming from the northwest, and it sounds wrong from the start. Too loud, too irregular. An outboard engine running at a speed it wasn't designed to run. The kind of sound a motor makes when it's trying to do more than it should, and the fuel-to-air mix is off. I turn off the burner and take the 308 from the corner and go to the loft window. The boat comes around the north point of the island, going too fast for the angle. Aluminum hull, probably 14 or 16 feet. I can't tell yet. 2 people visible. It's correcting course badly. The bow swinging left and right, and I realize almost immediately that whoever is steering it is either hurt or not doing it intentionally. The engine cuts out about 50 meters from the east side of the island. The boat doesn't stop. It has momentum, and the gentle current near the island shore has it now, and it drifts sideways toward the east rock ledge and makes contact with it hard enough that I can hear the hull scraping stone from the loft window. Neither person in the boat gets up. I stay in the loft for about 3 minutes. I watch the boat. It's caught on the ledge, bow angled up slightly, not taking on water as far as I can tell. One of the people in it is moving. I can see the shift of weight. The other isn't moving at all. I go down. I take the pistol with me. I leave the rifle, because I'm going to need both hands, and I can't be accurate at the ranges I'm dealing with while moving, and because I have no idea yet what I'm dealing with, and the pistol is easier to keep close. I go around to the east shore, through the birches, picking my way over the root ground. The morning light is coming sideways and yellow through the trees, and everything has that specific autumn sharpness to it, the kind of clear, cold air that makes your eyes water. My boots are wet from the frost in the grass, and I can feel it through the seams. I get to the east ledge and crouch behind a boulder. The boat is maybe 12 feet away, rocking gently in the chop where it hit. I can see them now. The person who was moving is a woman. Older, not elderly, but somewhere in her 50s, heavy gray-streaked hair cut short, wearing a canvas jacket and jeans. She's sitting up in the front seat, and she's looking at me. She found me before I announced myself, which means she was watching the tree line even while she was lying still, which tells me something about her. She doesn't look infected. Her eyes are clear and tracking, and she's looking directly at me with the specific expression of someone who is very tired and very scared and is trying not to let either show. The man in the back seat isn't looking at anything. He's maybe 30, wearing a dark jacket, and he's slumped against the motor housing in a way that means either unconscious or sleeping, and I'd bet unconscious. His left leg is propped up on the seat and wrapped in what looks like a ripped flannel shirt, tied tight around the lower calf. The cloth is dark. I come out from behind the boulder slowly with my hands visible, pistol down at my side. The woman says, "I'm not going to do anything stupid." I say, "Okay." She says, "Tom needs help. The engine, I didn't know how to drive it properly. He was teaching me, and then he couldn't anymore." I ask how long he's been like that. She says maybe 4 hours. I ask what happened to his leg. She's quiet for a second. Then she says, "He said he cut it on something getting to the boat. Glass," he said, "from a window." The way she says it, the pause before it, the way she follows the information with nothing, no qualifier, no additional detail, tells me she's not sure she believes what she just said. I wade into the water to my knees and grab the bow of the boat and pull it off the ledge and work it around toward the south side where I can bring it onto the gravel beach. The woman helps from inside, shifting her weight to help me turn it. She's got a practical instinct about her. I can tell she knows how to do what needs doing, even when she doesn't know exactly what that is. I get the boat up on the gravel, and then Tom has to come off the boat, and that's harder. He's not fully unconscious, more like somewhere between awake and something worse. He can move his arms and put some weight on his right leg, but he's hot. I can feel it when I get my arm around his back and lift. He's got a fever that's been running for some hours, and it's in full effect now. We get him up to the cabin. I clear the table and get a blanket and put him on the floor, because the table isn't wide enough, and the loft ladder is not something I can get him up in this condition. The woman kneels next to him and puts her hand on his forehead and looks up at me with an expression I recognize from the few times I've been alone with someone who was badly hurt. It's the look of someone who knows that the variable they're most worried about is now in someone else's hands. She says her name is Donna Ashby. She says Tom's name is Tom Hurley. She says they came from a town called Garner's Crossing, which I know. It's about 6 miles south of Weston Falls, maybe 9 miles from the boat launch by road. I say I'm Ray. I don't say my last name. I don't know why. I ask her what happened in Garner's Crossing. She doesn't answer immediately. She puts a wet cloth on Tom's forehead from the bucket I brought over, and then she sits back on her heels and looks at me. She says, "There are a lot of them down there now, in the streets, in the buildings. We were in the school for almost 2 weeks. Tom had a key. He serviced their Hefe units. And then the walls weren't working anymore, and we had to go." She pauses. Tom knew someone who kept a boat at the lake. About 2 miles from the school, we had to get to it through the streets, and Tom got cut on a window when we were going through a building. He told me it was a window. She looks at me again. Steady eyes. Biology teacher eyes. I'll learn later. Eyes that know the difference between what someone says and what the evidence suggests. She says, "I'm a high school biology teacher. I've read everything that's come out since this started. I know what the bite patterns look like." I don't say anything. She says, "I didn't ask him, because what were we going to do about it, if it was what I thought it was? We were in a building surrounded by them. He knew how to drive the boat. He was functional, and he was scared, and he was moving, and sometimes moving is everything." She presses the cloth to Tom's head again. He stirs, makes a sound, doesn't open his eyes. She says, "He needs antibiotics and a doctor. I don't have either of those." I say, "I have antibiotics. I don't know if they'll help with what you think this might be." She looks at me a long moment. Then she says quietly, "Neither do I." I give Tom amoxicillin and ibuprofen. I clean the wound on his leg. Donna holds his leg, and I unwrap the makeshift bandage, and what's underneath is not a cut from glass. It's a bite, oval in shape, ragged at the edges, maybe 3 inches across the widest dimension, deep enough to have bled heavily. Whoever cleaned it up before wrapping it did a decent job. It looks like Tom did his own first aid at some point. There's dried betadine on the skin around the wound's edge. But a bite is a bite, and this one has been on him for at least 12 hours. I clean it with betadine from my kit. I close the torn edges as well as I can with strips of medical tape. I wrap it properly. I don't say anything while I'm doing this, and neither does Donna. And Tom is either sleeping or unconscious, and doesn't react much to the cleaning, which would normally hurt. And the fact that it doesn't tells me the fever is high enough to be doing something to his sensation. I stand up and wash my hands and look at Donna. She says, "I know." I say, "How long since it happened?" She says, "Yesterday morning, before we left the school. He told me after we were in the boat. He said." She stops, clears her throat. "He said he wasn't going to tell me until he was sure. He's been telling himself the antibiotics would fix it. He said maybe it's like rabies. Maybe there's a window." I say, "Is there?" She says, "I don't know. I don't know enough about the mechanism. I don't know if anyone does." I look at Tom. He looks gray around the mouth now. His breathing is shallow and fast. He's maybe 31, 32. There's a dark blue tattoo of something on the back of his left hand, an anchor or a compass rose. I can't quite see. His hands are a mechanic's hands, scarred and stained with old grease in the creases. I say, "How long does it take?" Once there, how long does it take before they're not themselves anymore? Donna says, I've seen it take 6 hours. I've seen it take a day and a half. It's not consistent. The ones who were already sick or injured badly went faster. The ones who were otherwise healthy took longer. She swallows. Tom is healthy, or he was. I think about that. Then I say, okay, we need to talk about what we're doing if he changes. Donna nods once. It's a small, economical nod, the kind that means she's already had this thought and has been waiting for someone else to bring it up. I go get the pistol and put it on the shelf above the door, where it's accessible, but not obvious, and she watches me do it and doesn't say anything. We sit and watch him, and Ohio is quiet, and outside the lake is completely still. Tom stays himself for another 31 hours. It's not 31 hours of steady decline. It's stranger than that. He comes around in the evening of the first day and eats a little rice and drinks a lot of water and talks to Donna for almost an hour while I'm doing things in the shed, giving them space, and also because I needed to be somewhere I wasn't in that conversation. He talks about his mother's house. He talks about a dog he had when he was a kid named Freight. A half husky, half who knows what. He talks about a woman he used to know and breaks off in the middle of that and switches to talking about the evac system at Garner's Crossing Middle School, which he apparently knew down to the serial numbers on every valve. I come back in around 8 in the evening and he's conscious and looks at me and says, "You're the guy with the island," like it's a title. I say yes. He says, "Good idea." Then he goes back to sleep. He's still warm, but the fever has leveled off somewhat. Donna tells me in the kitchen corner, quiet, that she thinks the amoxicillin is doing something, but she doesn't know if it's treating the infection from the bite or just masking symptoms of something it has no effect on. She's remarkably lucid about what she doesn't know. I've met people who double down on certainty when they're scared, and people who become functionally paralyzed by what they don't know, and the ones who say clearly what they know and clearly what they don't are rare enough that I notice. He gets worse in the middle of the night. I'm in the loft. Donna is on the floor near him, sleeping in a sitting-up position with her back to the wall, the way people sleep when they can't commit to it. I'm not really sleeping either, half in, half out, the radio low. Ohio is still silent. There's a weather beacon droning a number sequence. Around 3 in the morning, the breathing pattern changes. It's the kind of change that you feel before you consciously hear it. Something in the rhythm goes wrong. Too fast and then too slow, and then fast again, in a way that isn't like breathing when you're sick. It's something else. I'm down the loft ladder before I'm fully awake, pistol in my hand, and Donna is already on her feet by the time I get to the bottom. Tom is still on the floor, but he's moved. He'd been on his back and now he's on his side, facing the wall, and there's something wrong with the shape of him, the way his head is positioned relative to his shoulders. He makes a sound, low, sustained, not a word, and not pain exactly, something you couldn't transcribe. Donna says, "Ray." I say, "I know." We both step back. I get between her and him. He gets up. Slowly, very slowly, not gracefully. There's nothing coordinated about it. It's like watching a marionette when the operator doesn't know all the strings. He gets his arms under him, and then his knees, and then he stands, and the sound he's making goes from low to something higher in the back of his throat, and he turns toward us, and the fever has done something to his face that I don't want to describe in detail. His eyes are still open. That's the worst part. Still open, but not the same eyes. I say, "Tom." Nothing. No recognition. No response to his name. No reaction to my voice, except that the high sound in his throat shifts when I make noise. He takes a step. Donna is behind me, and I feel her hand grip the back of my shirt just once, tightening and releasing, and she doesn't say anything. What I did next I'm not going to walk through in detail. I'll say it was necessary, and that I've thought about it every day since, and that I did it the way you do. Something that has to be done quickly, when doing it slowly, would be worse for everyone involved. I'll say that Donna did not look away, which took something I don't know that I have. After, we both went outside. She threw up on the east path. I walked to the dock and sat down with my hands hanging over the water and looked at the black surface of the lake in the dark. We didn't speak for a long time. Long enough that the sky started going from absolute dark to that dark gray that comes before any color, and I could start seeing the tree line across the lake. She came and sat next to me on the dock and said, "He was a good mechanic. He could diagnose any engine problem just by listening to it run. He said it was just pattern recognition, but I think some people are built to hear things other people can't." I said yes. She said, "How do we?" And she meant Tom, and I said we'd take care of it in the morning, and we didn't speak after that. We buried him on the west side of the island in the morning, in the soft ground under the willows near the water. I dug the hole and Donna gathered some late-season wildflowers, and we did it without any ceremony that either of us could articulate. The ground was cold and hard on top, but soft below. I put the fishing lure he'd had in his jacket pocket, a yellow spinnerbait, the kind you'd use for walleye, in with him because it seemed like something a mechanic who loved his dog might want there. After, I stood, and Donna stood, and we looked at the mound of dirt and the rocks I laid on top to keep the ground from settling weirdly. She said, "I need to know what we're doing now." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I mean, what's the plan? What are you doing out here? What are your supplies? What's your thinking? I'm not trying to take over, and I'm not in a position to make demands. I just need to know what's happening." So I told her. Inventory, water situation, food situation, weapons, radio status, what I'd seen on the far shore with the binoculars, all of it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "The propane is the limiting factor." I said yes. She said, "Wood stove for cooking?" I said yes, once it gets cold enough that it makes sense to run it all day. She said, "I can fish. I fished every summer with my father, from when I was about 6 until he died. I know what I'm doing." I believed her. She said, "What are you going to do with Tom's boat?" It was still on the beach where we'd brought it. 12-foot aluminum, 15 HP outboard, half a tank of gas. She was right that it was a resource I needed to think about. I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "Okay." We went back up to the cabin and she made coffee while I fixed the dock alarm I'd accidentally knocked loose in the morning, and that was how we started. The thing about having another person in a small space is that it changes the texture of every hour. I'm not complaining about it. I'm being specific. When it's just me, the island has a quality of silence that I chose and maintain, where even the sounds that break it, geese, wind, the dock chain, feel like they're part of the architecture. With Donna here, the silence is different. It has an awareness in it now, a background sense of another consciousness occupying the same small volume of space. She's not intrusive. Actually, she's quite good at calibrating how much space to take up, which I notice and appreciate, even though I don't tell her. She reads when she's not doing something practical. She found a stack of paperbacks I had in a milk crate under the work table, left over from various extended stays, and she's working her way through them methodically. In the evenings, she sits in the chair by the south window and reads with her back to me, while I do things at the work table, and the sound she makes occasionally turning a page becomes just part of the island's inventory of sounds. She also, to be frank, keeps me from getting strange in ways I didn't realize I was getting strange. By the 5th week, the 42nd day, by my doorframe count, I was starting to notice that I was narrating my activities to myself. Not out loud, but a steady internal commentary that was starting to feel like the only voice in a room and therefore the loudest. I was also starting to have whole conversations with my sister in my head that were increasingly incoherent, where she'd say sensible things and I'd say sensible things and neither of us would say the actual thing that needed saying. Having Donna here cuts that. Having her say, "Hand me that wrench," or "The perch aren't biting on the east side this morning," or "I think the barometer is dropping," is enough to interrupt the loop and put me back in the actual world, rather than the increasingly elaborate simulation of it my head was building. She doesn't know I notice this. I don't tell her. We fall into a routine fairly quickly. It's not a negotiated routine. We don't sit down and divide tasks or assign shifts. It just settles out of the morning habits. I'm up first. I get the fire going if we're running the stove. I do the radio check while coffee's on. She's up by the time coffee is ready. Makes her own adjustments to the fire. Usually takes the first fishing shift of the morning. I work on whatever maintenance the island needs. There's always something. The dock, the shed roof, the window on the north side that started letting cold air in. We cook together or separately depending on whether we're hungry at the same time. In the evenings, we both listen to the radio. Ohio came back on day 40. Flat voice, same as before. No acknowledgement of the gap. He said communication infrastructure in the northeastern U.S. had experienced significant interruption, which I interpreted as meaning that whatever relay system he was using had lost several nodes, and he'd had to rebuild around the gaps. He sounded exactly the same. Situation deteriorating faster than projected, he said, and I almost felt glad to hear it. Ohio also introduced a new piece of information. He said that in certain locations along the eastern seaboard, infected individuals had been observed entering bodies of water and remaining submerged for extended periods. He said that water was not, repeat not, a reliable barrier, particularly in shallow shoreline areas. He recommended that any survivor settlements on lakes, rivers, or coastal areas treat shallow zones as potential ingress routes. I look at Donna when Ohio says this. She looks at me. She says, "The beach." I say, "Yeah." We spent the afternoon building something better than the board fence I'd put up. I have extra 2x6 stock in the shed, and I have 3-inch galvanized screws. And Donna turns out to have some architectural instincts of her own. She suggested running the barrier from the tree line on the left to the boulder on the right, and running it right down into the water, which extends it past the ankle-depth zone that something could walk through without encountering it. We sunk 4 posts and ran 3 horizontal rails, and it's not exactly solid, but it's solid enough. And the posts go 18 inches into the lake bottom and set with underwater concrete I mixed by hand. It's not a comfortable evening. We're both thinking about what it means that Ohio specifically mentioned this. Donna says, "At some point after dinner, have you seen any of them in the water directly? Not wading from shore, but actually in the water beyond wading depth?" I tell her about the one I saw from the north end, chest deep, standing. She sits with that. She's picked up a stick from outside and she's turning it in her fingers, the kind of thing you do when you're thinking. She says, their muscle function doesn't require the normal neurological feedback, which means cold wouldn't cause the same kind of vasoconstriction and muscle failure it would in a normal person. They could theoretically function in water, well below the temperature threshold, that would incapacitate a living human. She says it clinically, the way you'd explain a scientific principle. I remember she was a biology teacher. I say, "How deep do you think they'd go?" She says, "I have no idea. But I think going is less about decision and more about physics. If something walks into water and keeps walking without a self-preservation mechanism telling it to stop, it'll walk until it falls, and then it might crawl, and the direction it goes would be determined by the last stimulus it was responding to." I say, "The last stimulus being noise or movement from this direction." She says, "Potentially, yes." We both look at the dark lake for a while. She says, "The channel is 30 feet deep in places, you said." I say, "In the middle, shallower at the margins." She says, That's all she says, and then she goes back to her book. I go and check the dock alarm. I check the beach barrier. I walk the perimeter of the island in the dark with a flashlight shielded on 3 sides with tape, directing the beam mostly at the ground. Everything is as it should be. The lake sounds normal. A small wind has come up from the south, and it makes the water whisper against the rocks on the east face. I should try to sleep. It's day 47, and something has happened to the John boat. I find it in the morning when I go to check on the anchorage under the dock. It's still lashed there, but it's riding wrong, lower than it should be, listing to the left. I get the flashlight and look under the hull, and find a split about 14 inches long in the aluminum on the port side, just below the waterline. Not a huge split, but big enough. The boat has been taking in water slowly all night. I get it bailed out immediately and check the damage. It's repairable. Aluminum boat damage usually is. You can use marine epoxy and aluminum tape as a temporary fix, and a proper rivet patch if you have the materials. I have marine epoxy in the shed, left over from a project years ago. The aluminum tape I'm not sure about. But here's the question that the damage raises. How did this happen? The boat was lashed under the dock in calm water. No storms, no significant wind. The dock is solid. I built it, and there's nothing jutting from it that could have caused this kind of split. I look at the damage pattern. It's not impact damage. It's stress fracture damage, the kind that happens when a hull is pushed against something and held there. There's a smear of something on the outside of the hull near the split, grayish, like paint or algae or... I lean in closer and hold the flashlight right to it. It's skin. Human skin, the kind of dull gray color that happens after a certain amount of time in cold water. Something was against the hull, pushed against it with enough force and sustained enough pressure to fracture the aluminum. I don't say anything to Donna immediately. I straighten up and breathe through my nose and look at the water, and I'm thinking about 30 feet in the channel and shallower at the margins, and the way she said potentially yes with that particular inflection that a biology teacher uses when she's trying not to alarm you, while also not lying to you. The water under the dock is maybe 6 feet deep. The dock sits about 2 feet above the surface, so the bottom clearance from dock deck to lake floor is maybe 8 feet. Plenty of room for something standing on the bottom to push up against the underside of the hull. I bail the boat completely and apply the marine epoxy as a first coat seal over the split, which is all I can do right now until it cures. I check the lashings and move the boat to the opposite side of the dock, the leeward side that gets more light during the day, so I can see the water around it better. Then I go in and tell Donna. She takes it with that same steady quality she brings to alarming information. She asks a few questions. What's the damage? Can you fix it? What's the timeline? I give her the answers. The epoxy needs 24 hours to cure before I can even test the seal. Another 24 to get hard enough to trust. 2 days minimum before I know if the boat is functional. She says, so right now we have the canoe. I say, right now we have the canoe. She says, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking since last night, and I didn't want to say it until I was sure. She picks the stick up again and starts turning it. When you first brought us to the cabin, when Tom was still, she pauses, still himself, he said something to me while you were outside. He said that when they were at the school, in the last few days before they left, he'd seen one of them get into the water from the Garner's Crossing town dock. He said it went in and didn't come back up. He said he was watching from a second-floor window for about 2 hours, and it never surfaced. I say, did he tell you how deep the dock water was? She says, no. I say, okay. She says, Ray, the thing he said was that he didn't know if it was swimming or if it was walking on the bottom. He said it moved as a consistent direction and speed, and went straight for the opposite bank. He said it crossed the entire river, which is about 60 meters at that point, without surfacing. I think about the split in the hull. I think about the gray skin residue. I say, 60 meters isn't 400. She says, no, it isn't. I say, and the deepest part of that channel in the middle is 30 feet. Something would have to cover 40 meters of lake bottom at 30 feet of depth before it got to the shallower areas near the island. She says yes. I say, that's a lot of ground for something that's not navigating. She says, yes. Neither of us says what we're both computing about probability and time, and whether the margins of our situation have gotten materially smaller today. But they have. We both know it. I spend 2 days repairing the boat and improving the island's perimeter, and not thinking about it more than necessary, or trying not to. The marine epoxy sets well on the first coat, and I add a second coat over the cured first, and reinforce it with a strip of aluminum flashing I had in the shed, sealed at the edges with caulk. It's not a permanent fix, but it'll hold pressure. While the epoxy cures, I work on the south beach barrier. I extend it further into the water on both sides, to the point where the lake bottom drops away faster, and anything walking the bottom toward the barrier would encounter water depth before it encountered the barrier. This is partly theoretical, but it makes me feel better, which has a value. I also make something I've been thinking about for a while, a simple tension wire alarm system. I have a spool of picture-hanging wire and a collection of small bells I picked up from some long-ago project. They were in a can in the shed, which is where things that don't have an obvious home go in my shed. In cans, organized roughly by material. The wire runs from a post at the waterline at each corner of the beach barrier, stretched taut just above the water's surface, and then runs up the path to the cabin, where it's tied to a crossbar that holds a cluster of the bells. If the wire is disturbed at the waterline, the bells ring at the cabin. Donna looks at this when I show her and says, "That's actually quite good." I say, "It's basic." She says, "The basic things work." That night I sleep better than I have in a while, which is probably irrational but isn't. Day 53. This is when the second thing happens that changes everything. I'm doing the evening radio sweep. I move through the shortwave frequencies methodically these days, about 10 minutes per band, looking for anything useful, when I find it. It's on a frequency I don't usually get strong signal on, somewhere in the 7 megahertz range that normally just gives me distant voice traffic from the South Atlantic. But tonight, it's a local signal. It's a repeating signal, not a voice. A sequence of tones, 3 short and 2 long. Pause, 3 short and 2 long. Exactly regular. Either automated or someone very deliberately reproducing the same sequence every few seconds without variation. I hold my breath and listen. It's been going for at least several minutes before I found it, possibly much longer. The signal strength is fair, not strong. Maybe a few miles, maybe less, depending on the propagation conditions tonight. I get out the topographic map I have of the lake and surrounding area. I've had it for years. It's got handwritten notes on it from various trips. I look at what's within a few miles of this island on the water. To the north, open lake. To the south, the main shore with the public launch area and Millhaven beyond. To the east, the far shore with the road and the woods. To the west, the open lake stretching to the far end. And, here, Pitcher Island. Pitcher Island. I've never been to it. It's smaller than my island. Maybe an acre. Sits about 1.25 miles to the west. It shows up on the map as just a green blob. No structures marked, though the map is old. It's far enough from shore that I've never thought much about it. I get Donna, and she listens to the signal for a few minutes. She says, "That's not a weather beacon. The interval is wrong for a weather beacon." She's also thinking. She says, "It sounds like a Morse SOS that someone modified or mixed up. 3 short, 2 long. SOS in standard Morse is 3 short, 3 long, 3 short." I say, "So either someone who knows Morse, but not quite correctly, or someone who modified it deliberately." She says, "Or an automated transmitter set up by someone who isn't sure of their Morse." I say, "There's someone on Pitcher Island." She doesn't answer right away. She says, "There may have been someone on Pitcher Island." The distinction matters, and we both know it. We listen to the signal for another hour. It doesn't change. It doesn't vary. 3 short, 2 long, pause, 3 short, 2 long. It continues at the exact same interval for an hour, which argues for automated more than manual, because even the most patient person develops microsecond variations in a repeated manual operation over that length of time. I pull out the binoculars and try to see Pitcher Island through the loft window, but it's after 10, and there's no moon, and the lake in the west direction is just black. In the morning, I look. There's nothing to see from 1.25 miles. Just trees over water, the island's profile low against the sky. No smoke, no lights, no visible structures. I sit on the porch with my coffee and think about whether to take the canoe out and go look. The reasons not to. Donna would be alone on the island for at least an hour, possibly more. The canoe is quiet, but visible on open water in daylight. If there's something wrong on Pitcher Island, something other than a person sending a signal, I'd be 1.25 miles from any backup. The reasons too: information. The signal is information, and information is the thing I'm most short of. Someone set that up. Someone chose that frequency and that sequence and went to the trouble of automating it, which means they wanted someone to hear it and know something. They spent effort on it. I let the signal run for 2 more days while I keep doing other things. I fix the gap in the shed siding. I take stock of the medical supplies. Tom's time on the island depleted more than I'd like to think about, specifically the betadine and the sutures, and about 1/3 of the ibuprofen. I make a list of what we'd need from the mainland if we were going to resupply, which is a list I make not because I plan to act on it, but because making the list is better than not knowing the numbers. Donna goes fishing in the mornings from the dock, and she's genuinely good at it. She rigs the bobber differently from how I do it, using a slip float setup that lets her change depth faster without retying. She catches 5 yellow perch on the 3rd morning, using a small piece of worm that I'd have thrown away, and she keeps 2 of them back to cut into strips for the next day's bait. I watch her do this without commenting. She knows what she's doing. On the 4th evening, listening to the signal again, she says, "I want to go out there." I say, "You know how to handle a canoe?" She says, "My father had one." "I told you. We spent every summer on the water." I say, "Not at night." She says, "Why at night?" I say, "Because in the dark from shore we'd be invisible. In daylight, a canoe on open water is very visible." She thinks about this. She says, "Together?" I say, "It'll be slower, and I'd rather have you here. But yeah, together is probably better." She says, "Okay. When?" I say, 2 nights from now. Check the weather first." 2 nights later, the weather is clear, cold, no wind, a crescent moon setting around 10 p.m. We wait for the moon to go down. The lake is very dark and very still, and the signal is coming through on the shortwave clearly, which means the source is in good condition and hasn't degraded. We carry the canoe down to the gravel beach, and I hold it while Donna gets in the front. I hand her the double-blade paddle and get in the back with my single blade. I've got the pistol in the chest pocket of my jacket. Donna has the small pocket knife she had in her jacket when she arrived. I've considered the rifle, but it's too long for a canoe in the dark. If something happened, I'd just have it get in the way. We push off. The water is cold enough that you can feel it as a quality, a weight in the air above it. I orient by the signal sound from the speaker I left on at the cabin. You can hear the 3 short 2 long pattern for about half a mile over still water at night. After that, I'm navigating by the island profile against the sky. It takes about 25 minutes. We don't speak. I've gotten good enough at reading Donna's body language that I know when she's stopped being relaxed and started being alert. And the transition happens when we're about 200 meters out from Pitcher Island. She sits up slightly and her paddling slows. I slow too. The island is darker than dark. Pine trees right down to the water on the near side. No lights, no sound, except the water against the rocks and the periodic sound of a loon somewhere to the south. We circle it slowly, staying about 30 meters out, before deciding to approach. Donna spots the only viable landing spot, a place on the south side where the tree cover breaks, and there's a small flat area of rock above the waterline. Not a dock, not even a beach really, just a flat section of rock shelf that someone could tie up to. There's a rope already there. A frayed nylon rope, one end looped around a pine trunk and the other end hanging in the water. Maybe 6 months frayed, from the look of the nylon. Nobody's tied to it currently, but it was used repeatedly. The pine bark is worn smooth where the rope pressed. We land and I hold the bow while Donna gets out. I tie us to the same pine. We click on the small flashlights. I have a keychain light and she has a pen flashlight. We keep them to the minimum. Dark enough out here that even a keychain light carries further than you want. The island is small. I can feel that immediately. The trees are close together, and the ground underfoot is that particular kind of springy you get on small islands, where the soil depth is limited, and the pine duff is doing most of the work. The slope is gentle, everything angling up to a low central ridge. The cabin, if you call it that, is in the middle. I almost walk into it before I see it. It's a shed, not what I'd call proper construction. Low, maybe 6 by 8 feet of floor space, built from what looks like scavenged lumber, mix of dimensional stock and rough cut, and what might be packing crate wood. A pitched metal roof. The door is plywood, hinged with bent metal strap hinges. There's no lock. Donna touches my arm. There's a wire running from the shed. Thin coaxial or antenna wire, running up a pole and then to the pine trees, strung between them in a rough L shape. The antenna for the transmitter. And from inside the shed there's a faint periodic blue light, the LED indicator on whatever device is sending the signal. 3 short, 2 long pause. In person, you can hear the tiny mechanical click of the keyer cycling. I open the plywood door. The inside is a lot. I'm not prepared for how much information is in a 6x8 space. The transmitter is on a low shelf, made of a single board, nailed between 2 screwed-down wooden brackets. It's a marine SSB radio, the kind you'd use on a larger boat, adapted to a stationary setup and powered by a small 12-volt battery connected to a solar panel on the roof through a hole in the metal. A DIY setup, rough but functional. A note taped to the transmitter reads, Pitcher Island repeating signal, 7.242 megahertz. If you hear this, come find me. The date on the note is September 14th, 7 weeks ago. The rest of the shed. I turn the flashlight around. 1 folded sleeping bag, mildew spotted. A canvas bag with some tools in it. Pliers, wire strippers, a multi-tool. A milk crate full of canned goods, about 12 cans remaining, some of them punctured and dry. Fishing line on a hand-wound spool. A tin cup. A camp stove, no fuel canister visible, and filling the remaining wall and most of the floor space. Stacked, rubber band bound, weather protected with plastic notebooks. There are at least 30 of them. Composition notebooks, spiral notebooks, 1 large hardcover that looks like a drafting journal. All full, all written in the same hand, small and precise, and slightly tilted. I pick up the top notebook. On the cover, someone has written in the same hand, Harrow Lake, Howard Leck, Volume 14. Donna is beside me now and she picks up another one and reads the cover and looks at me. I say, Howard Leck. She says, this is someone's life. I say yes. I look around the shed more carefully. I'm a carpenter. I look at construction with a specific eye. This shed was not built by someone who knows construction. The corners are imprecise. The roof pitch is uneven. The door fits badly. But the effort is here. Someone who didn't know what they were doing built this thing and made it work and lived in it or near it or used it as a base. I look for food evidence beyond the cans. There are fish bones in a corner, a pile of them, somewhat decomposed, the sort that accumulates over months of eating fish and having nowhere to put the remains. There are boot prints in the corner, where the soil has come up through a gap in the floorboards. Smallish prints, narrow heel, maybe a size 9 boot. I look for blood. No injury evidence. The sleeping bag is musty and mildewed, but not stained. I pick up 4 notebooks, Volume 1, Volume 14, the most recent on top of the stack, and the large drafting journal, and put them in my jacket and gesture to Donna. We need to go. I don't want to be on open water past 3 a.m. She takes 2 more notebooks without me asking. We paddle back in silence. The signal plays behind us as we go, getting quieter. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short, 2 long, until we're back at our island and can only just hear it. And then we're over the dock, and the sound is replaced by the gentle knock of the canoe against the dock piling, and the bells shifting faintly in the night air. Inside. Coffee on the stove. I'll run the stove at night if I'm going to be awake anyway. We sit across from each other at the table and open the notebooks. Howard Leck arrived on Pitcher Island on February 8th. That's what Volume 1 says, in the first entry. February 8th. 8 months before the outbreak started. Before anyone, as far as I know, had any idea this was coming. He was 63 years old. He says so on page 2, along with his height, his blood type, and his father's name. He says these things the way someone would if they expected the notebook to be found by someone who didn't know him. He's already thinking about readability. He was a retired electrical engineer from Portland, Maine. He'd been living in a rented house outside Millhaven for 2 years after his wife's death. The notebooks mention her death without detail, just the fact of it, the way you mention something that's already been processed. And one winter day, he'd gotten into his kayak and paddled out to Pitcher Island and decided to stay. He says, "I have been thinking for a long time about what it means to withdraw. Not because the world is bad particularly. It's average. It's fine. I just feel like the signal-to-noise ratio has been pointing the wrong direction for several years, and I'm old enough not to have to wait it out." He built the shed over the following months. He describes it in detail. The sourcing of materials, the mistakes, the things he wished he'd done differently. He was living on Pitcher Island with a kayak, and what he'd been able to bring over in it, over multiple trips through the winter. He survived February and March by ice fishing through gaps in the ice at the island's edge. He was good at making things work. By April, he had power from a solar panel he'd bought online and had delivered to a hardware store in Millhaven, where he'd arrange pickups, taking his kayak to the boat launch and walking the 2 miles to town. By May, he had the antenna up and was listening to ham radio traffic. By June, he knew something was coming. I read that 3 times. By June, he knew something was coming. He doesn't say how he knew. He says, "Hearing the same kind of noise on the shortwave frequencies I was careful about 4 years ago, on the frequency that I used to use for work. The signal pattern is not a coincidence pattern. Someone knows something and is telling someone else and is trying not to be obvious about it." He was a retired electrical engineer who knew what signal patterns are and aren't coincidences. I don't know what to do with that, except believe it. By July, he'd stockpiled everything he could bring over in his kayak from Millhaven. He stopped going to Millhaven after July 17th, when he describes a conversation in the hardware store parking lot with a man who was talking on his phone about quarantines in Connecticut and seemed scared in a specific way that Howard says he recognized. He says, "When an engineer is scared, it looks like math." His math was pointing south. In August, the outbreak started, and Howard Leck was already on Pitcher Island with his shed and his radio and his notebooks, and he knew more about what was happening than I did when I first started paying attention. He spent the fall on the island alone. The notebooks, I'm reading volume 14, which covers October, describe his routines in extraordinary detail. Fishing, shelter maintenance, fire management, water collection. He'd rigged a rain collection system off the metal roof that was genuinely clever. He ate well, by island standards. He was thorough. He was also frightened, in that engineering way, solving the fear into data. He'd been in contact with someone. I find this in volume 12, which Donna is reading. She looks up and says, "He was talking to someone on the radio." I say, "On the SSB?" She says, "He set it up specifically. He found a frequency that one of the survivor groups was using, and he monitored it for 2 weeks before he transmitted." He says, "Wait, let me find it. Here. I don't know who they are or what they want, but they are organized in a way that suggests pre-existing infrastructure. They know what they are doing. I have transmitted my location twice and have not received a direct response, but my transmissions were acknowledged by a code shift in the next broadcast from their frequency. They know I am here." I put down volume 14 and say, "A survivor group was already in contact with him. Before we got here." She says, "Before we got here. Maybe 2 months ago, based on the notebook dates." I say, "And then the signal stopped being updated manually. The last entry in volume 14 is October 2nd. I flip to the back to confirm. October 2nd. A short entry. "Hands are difficult today. Something is wrong with my right side. The arm is not cooperating. I can't quite." And it stops mid-sentence. No period. A man living alone on an island with something happening to his right arm, and the sentence cuts out in the middle. Donna and I look at each other across the table. I say, "Stroke." She says very quietly, "Or something else." I say, "We need to go back tomorrow and search the whole island." She says, "Yes." I say, "But carefully." She says, "Obviously carefully." I close the notebook. The transmitter is still sending from Pitcher Island. 3 short, 2 long. 3 short, 2 long. And now I know who built it, and why, and what happened that stopped anyone from updating the message. Howard Leck set a machine to call for help because he had enough foresight to know that he might not be able to call for it himself. The question is, who else heard it first? We go back to Pitcher Island, in the early morning of the next day, just after dawn. This time I bring the rifle. Donna brings the fishing rod as cover. I don't know for whom, but it makes sense to have it. The island looks different in gray October morning light. Smaller, somehow. The pines are that dark winter pine color, almost black against the pale sky. We tie up at the same rope spot. I do the perimeter first, walk the entire shoreline of Pitcher Island, which takes about 12 minutes at a careful pace. The shoreline is mostly rock. On the north side, I find a place where the rock is scuffed, in a way that suggests something went into the water, or came out of it. But the scuff is old, maybe weeks. Could be Howard with his kayak. Could be something else. The kayak. I should look for the kayak. I find it on the south side of the island, pulled up into a small gap between 2 pines, upside down in the brush. Red fiberglass, 17-footer. It's been there long enough for a layer of pine needles to settle on the bottom. No damage that I can see. Howard didn't leave the island. He stayed. I searched the tree area with Donna, both of us working from the perimeter inward. The island's vegetation is thin enough that the search takes about 20 minutes. We find a second small structure I missed in the dark. A latrine. Just a hole with a wooden seat and a frame. Fully exposed, positioned to be downwind of the shed. We find the disturbed ground under the big pine on the north side of the central ridge. It's about 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, and it's been recently disturbed in a way that I've seen once before this fall. The soil has that specific characteristic. Not heaped, but settled, the way soil settles when the weight distribution above it has changed. A ring of stones around the perimeter, deliberately placed. Howard Leck buried himself, or someone buried him. But the kayak is still here, and there's no indication anyone else was on this island, which means he had enough time and enough function in his left hand and both legs to dig and prepare and lie down, which is a kind of determined ending that stops my chest for a moment. He was 63 years old. He'd lost his wife. He'd come to an island to be alone, and he'd read the signals months before anyone else, and he'd set a machine to call for help, and he'd recorded everything he knew in 30-some composition notebooks, and then I put my hand on the pine bark and leave it there a moment. Donna stands a few feet away. She says, "I'll find some stones." We add stones to the ring. It doesn't take long. The island has no shortage of them. After we've done it, we stand there a moment, and then Donna says, "He wasn't infected." I say no, he didn't look like the entry, the way it stopped. She says, "No. I'm saying his death means there was no risk of infection here. The island is clean." I look at her. She's being practical. She's right. I say, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" She says, "I'm thinking this shed is better positioned than our island. Further from shore, smaller, quieter, a radio already installed." I say, "Our island has the cabin, the supplies, the boat." She says, "Yes." A pause. "I'm not saying we move. I'm saying we know it's here." I nod. We gather the remaining notebooks, all 32 of them. I carry them back to the canoe in 2 trips, stacked carefully, wrapped in a piece of tarp from the shed. We take the multi-tool from the canvas bag and the fishing line, and the marine radio setup, which I detach carefully from its battery and panel. We leave the sleeping bag, it's too far gone, and we leave the camp stove and the empty cans. On the way back, I keep the signal still going on the radio, but now I'm the one who decides whether to keep broadcasting it or shut it off. It's a strange kind of power. I leave it running for now. I haven't decided yet. Howard's notebooks. I spend 5 days reading them. Not sequentially. I read by what seems most urgent. Volume 1 for context. The most recent volumes for current intelligence. The drafting journal separately, because it turns out to be not a diary, but a technical log. Schematics, antenna calculations, frequency maps, Equipment notes. The man was an engineer to his last breath. Everything documented. The most important information is in volumes 10 through 13. October and the weeks before. Howard had been monitoring the survivor group's frequency for 2 months. He describes their traffic in careful detail. They were organized out of what he thinks is a town called Stanel, about 12 miles south of the lake on the state route. He never got a name from them, just call signs. They used numbers, not names, on the air. He refers to them as the Stanel Group. The Stanel Group had been systematically cataloging the lake area. He describes in Volume 12 intercepted transmissions in which the group discussed specific locations. The boat launch at Harrow Lake, compromised, too exposed. A farmhouse on the north shore, explored, abandoned. The 2 islands visible on the lake, noted, require investigation. The 2 islands, My Island and Pitcher Island, noted, require investigation. He writes, I am not certain whether their interest is resource-based or territorial in the practical sense. My impression from the communication style is that they are not hostile, but they are not humanitarian either. They are building something, and they are building it with the same kind of thoroughness I would apply to an engineering problem. The question I cannot determine from listening is whether new people are assets to them or complications. I find the note in Volume 13 where they acknowledged him. He transmitted his location and a brief description of his resources. They came back on the frequency within 2 hours with a message that was, by his account, Pitcher Island acknowledged. Continue monitoring. Contact again when situation changes. He writes, after copying out this message, they are collecting addresses. I am now in their address book. This is either the best thing I could have done or the worst. Then, about a week later, the situation has changed. My right arm began to show symptoms this morning that I initially thought were cold-related. By this afternoon, I could not hold a pencil properly. By this evening, the pencil is in my left hand, and this is taking 3 times as long as it should. I have made a decision about what to do with the remaining time I seem to have, and I will not transmit to the Stanel Group again. If they look for me, they will find the machine saying what I told it to say. I would prefer not to be found. I would prefer to leave the notebooks for someone who is in a position to use them. He was talking about me, or about whoever found the signal. He couldn't know who it would be. I feel something. Not quite grief because I didn't know him, but the proximity of him, the way he left instructions for a stranger through the act of filling 32 composition notebooks, is a particular kind of intimacy that I don't know how to name. I tell Donna about the Stanel Group. She asks me what I think we should do. I say I don't know yet. She says, the frequency he was monitoring. Do you have it? I say, Volume 12. Yes. She says, can we receive them? I say, with the antenna we brought back from Pitcher Island. Probably yes. The setup is better than what I have. More power. She says, then let's listen before we decide anything. I set up the Marine SSB radio from Howard's shed on my work table, running the antenna wire up through the loft and out the same gap I already had in the siding. The battery takes a charge from my solar system. It takes me an afternoon to get it calibrated and the antenna trimmed for the frequency. When I get a good signal on the frequency Howard listed, I put in earbuds and listen. The Stanel Group is still active, very active. I listen for 6 hours over 2 days before I say anything to Donna about what I'm hearing. They call themselves the Survey. That's not a name they announce. It's what I start calling them after listening to their transmissions, because that's what they're doing. They survey. They assess locations, resources, population estimates, infrastructure. Their communication style is precise and almost bureaucratic. Number call signs, structured message format, standardized information fields. When they talk about a location, they describe it in terms of defensibility, resource yield, access routes, and what they call burden score, which I eventually figure out means the ratio of people who can work to people who can't. They mention Harrow Lake twice in the period I'm listening. The first time is a routine entry. Lake area status unchanged. Islands not yet assessed. The second time, On the third day of listening, something different. A voice I haven't heard before, more deliberate, a different cadence from the usual operators, comes on the frequency and asks specifically about the lake. He says, "What's the current status on the island assessment? I want it moved up." The reply is, "Moved up how far?" The voice says, "This week." There's a pause. The operator says, "That'll require a boat." The voice says, "We have a boat." The voice has a particular quality to it. Calm in a very specific way. The way people sound when they're calm, because they've decided to be, and not because the situation warrants it. I've known a few people like that. They can be very useful. They can also be very dangerous, depending on what they've decided about. I take the earbuds out and sit at the table. Donna reads my face. She puts her book down and says, "What?" I say, "They're coming. Not tomorrow. But within the week, probably." She says, "Who?" I say, "The Stanell Group. The people Howard was in contact with." I lay out what I know from the notebooks and from the transmissions. She listens carefully. When I finish, she sits with it for a long minute. She says, "We could still be invisible." I say, "We've been mostly invisible. No lights after dark, limited fire smoke. But the signal from Pitcher Island has been running for 7 weeks. If they're doing systematic monitoring of this area, they've heard it. Howard is in their notes and Pitcher Island is in their notes and," she says, "and we've been to Pitcher Island twice in a canoe." I say, "In the dark. But yeah." She says, "Could they have seen us?" I think about it. A canoe on a dark lake is a very low visual profile. No engine noise. Moving at night. Not easily, I say, but we can't know for certain. She says, "So they know about Pitcher Island. They may not know about this island." I say, "The smoke from the chimney. The boat anchor at the dock. They'd have to be looking carefully from shore, and at the right time of day, but if they're systematic about it." She says, "Then we're potentially in their notes already." I say, "Potentially." We both sit with that. Outside the lake is doing its October thing. Flat gray water and the tree line starting to go bare on the far shore. The maples have mostly dropped their leaves now, and the oaks are holding the brown ones that'll stay all winter. The sky is the color of wet concrete. Donna says, "I don't think we should hide from them." I say, "Okay." She says, "Not because I trust them, because hiding isn't a strategy, it's a delay. The winter is coming. We have enough food, probably, but not definitely. If something happens to one of us medically, there's nothing here that I can't handle with an ibuprofen and some bandaging, which is not much. We are 2 people on an island, and the outside world, whatever it's become, is eventually going to come to us." I say, "Howard chose not to contact them when he could." She says, "Howard was 63, and alone, and dying of a stroke, and had already made his decision about what his life was going to be." She's not harsh when she says this, just precise. "We haven't made that decision." I say, "You haven't." She looks at me. She says, "Have you?" I think about it. Really think about it. Not the reflex answer, which is to say, "Yes, of course I have. This is what I chose." I think about what I actually want, which is harder than it sounds when what you want and what you've built your whole life around are the same thing, and now the thing might be wrong. I say, "I don't know." She says, "That's a better answer than yes." Day 60. The boat appears on the evening of day 60, coming up from the south end of the lake. I see it from the loft. A larger boat than anything I've seen on Harrow Lake in 2 months. A center console fishing boat, maybe 22 feet, with a small cuddy cabin, running at a moderate speed, no lights, which means whoever is driving it knows to be careful. Coming from the direction of Millhaven. It doesn't come to my island. It goes to Pitcher Island. I watch through the binoculars as it circles Pitcher Island slowly, once completely around, then approaches the south side and ties up at the same pine rope landing. 3 people get off. They have flashlights, more confident about lights than I'd be, which tells me something about their read of the threat level on the lake. They move around the island for about 45 minutes. I watch them find the shed. I watch them find Howard's grave, though I can't see exactly what they do there. Then they get back in the boat and go back the way they came. They didn't find anything alarming on Pitcher Island because we took the most alarming things, the notebooks, the radio. What they found was an abandoned shed with a working transmitter and some supplies and a grave. They also found, I realize with a cold drop in my stomach, the marks where we dragged the canoe ashore and pulled it back. Fresh marks, sand and gravel displaced. A carpenter looks at disturbance in material surfaces and reads them. Anyone systematic enough to survey a lake island is systematic enough to read those marks. They know someone was recently on that island who wasn't buried under the pine. 3 hours later, my shortwave receiver picks up a transmission on Howard's frequency. Not the usual survey format. Different. Direct. Addressed rather than broadcast. It says, "Whoever is on Harrow Lake and has recently visited Pitcher Island, we are interested in contact. We are not here to take what you have. We are looking for people. Frequency is open at 0700 and 1900. Howard Leck's notes have been very helpful to us. Thank you for maintaining his signal." I stare at the receiver. They thank us for maintaining the signal we had nothing to do with maintaining, but they assume we're responsible for it, which means they think we set it up, or we're with Howard, or are connected to him in a way that makes us known. They used his name, Howard Leck's notes. They already had contact with him, they had his name, they knew where he was, and now they know someone found him. Donna has been asleep in the loft. I don't wake her yet. I sit at the table in the dark with the transmitter in front of me, and Howard's notebook open to the last entry, and I think about what the word asset means to an organized group when they find 2 people on a lake island in the middle of winter. It could mean everything good. A community rebuilding, looking for people with skills. A survival settlement that needs a carpenter and a biology teacher. It could mean the other kind of asset, the one where your location and your resources and your working situation are the asset, not you specifically. I don't know yet. I won't know until I talk to them. I sit there a long time. At some point, I pick up Howard's notebook, the last one, and I read back from the last entry through the previous pages until I find the one I was looking for. Volume 13, page 47. He'd written, "I have spent a long time deciding whether solitude is wisdom or avoidance. I have come to think it is both. The skill is knowing which one you're in at any given time." I put the notebook down. At 0700, I go to the transmitter. I make coffee first. I'm not going to do this without coffee. The stove is cold, so I use the propane burner, quick and quiet. And I drink the coffee while looking out the south window at the lake. Gray morning, thin ice at the shore's edge for the first time. The temperature dropped overnight to something in the high 20s. The far shore is bare now, all the leaves down, the birch trunks white and legible. I go to the transmitter. I key it and say, "Harrow Lake here. Who am I talking to?" There's a pause. Maybe they were expecting this, and someone's on the frequency. Maybe they left it unmonitored, and there's nobody there. About 30 seconds pass. Then a voice. The voice I identified as different in the survey transmissions. The deliberate one. It says, "My name is Greg Farlow. I'm the operations coordinator for a settlement called Stannell Landing. We have about 200 people. I'm glad you reached out." I say, "I didn't reach out. You reached out. I'm responding." A shorter pause. He says, "Fair enough." I say, "How did you find the signal?" He says, "We've been monitoring shortwave traffic in the lake region for about 6 weeks. We found Howard's transmission 4 weeks ago and identified Pitcher Island as the source. We tried to make contact, but couldn't raise a response, which suggested the operator was no longer active. We went to check in person last night." Another pause. "We found someone else had been there recently." I say, "What did you find in the shed?" He says, "An automated transmitter. A set of canned goods someone went through and took some of. A grave." I say, "What's in Howard Leck's notes that you found helpful?" He says, "He documented the lake's layout, the locations of resources, water sources, shoreline conditions. He was thorough." I say, he mentioned your group. He wasn't sure you were trustworthy. A pause, the longest one yet. Then, I'm aware that he had reservations. I'd like the chance to address them. Donna comes down the ladder. She sees me at the transmitter. She stops. She doesn't interrupt. I say, what do you need from us? Farlow says, I need to know who you are and what your situation is, and I'd like to meet in person if that's possible. I say, what happens after that? He says, that depends on what you want. We have a settlement. We need people. We need skills. We need what you have, which is apparently a working island shelter with a water source, and whatever else you've built out there. He pauses. We're not asking you to give us anything. We're asking you to come look at what we've built and tell us what you think. I say, what if I don't want to come look at what you've built? He says, then I'll ask what you do want, and we'll go from there. Donna has come to stand beside the transmitter. She looks at me. Her expression is not telling me what to do. It's asking. I say, give me 48 hours. Farlow says, the frequency is open at 0700 and 1900. I click off. Donna pours herself coffee from the pot I left on. She holds the cup in both hands and looks at the radio. She says, tell me everything. I tell her everything. The previous 2 days of monitoring, the visit to Pitcher Island, the transmission last night, the conversation just now. She listens with her characteristic stillness. She asks clarifying questions in the right places. She doesn't editorialize until I've finished. Then she says, 200 people. I say, that's what he said. She says, that's a town, a small town, but still. I say, it's what he said they have. I don't know if it's accurate. She says no. She drinks the coffee. What's your gut on him? I say smart, organized, careful about how he says things. He uses phrasing that sounds open but doesn't commit to anything. She says, he said we're not asking you to give us anything. I say, yeah, as opposed to saying they won't take anything. Those are different statements. She's quiet. She goes to the window and looks at the lake. She says, 200 people. A biology teacher is useful at 200 people. Sanitation, health protocols, disease prevention, that's the thing that kills communities, not the zombies. It's always been disease and failed sanitation and bad nutrition. She turns around. A carpenter is useful too. I say, you want to go? She says, I want to go and look. I'm not moving. I'm going and looking. She says, what do you want? I sit with it. The table in front of me has Howard's notebook on it, and the transmitter, and my cold cup of coffee. Through the window behind Donna's head, I can see the south shore of the lake and the thin ice at the water's edge, and beyond that, the birch woods that I've been looking at for 3 months. I've been thinking, this past week, about Howard's last sentence, the one that cut off. I have been thinking about what he was going to say next. What would come after I can't quite. Maybe I can't quite see it, or I can't quite finish, or I can't quite hold on. I've been thinking about how he set the machine to keep calling, and then lay down, and did not answer the call himself. I say, I built this place because I work better when things are quiet and clear. That's still true. I pause. But I think what I've been doing for the last 2 months is using that as a reason for something else. And I don't want to be the version of myself that doesn't know which one he's in. Donna looks at me. I say, we should go look. She says, okay. I say, but not without conditions. We go together. We take one radio. We don't tell them everything about the island. Not the supplies. Not the boat repair status. Not the structural details. We listen more than we talk. And if anything feels wrong, we come back. She says, and if we get stuck there, if something prevents us from coming back, I say, then we deal with that when it happens. She says, okay. She puts her cup down. When? I say, tomorrow morning, 0700 broadcast. I'll tell Farlow to meet us on the south shore at the boat launch. Neutral ground, public space, not their territory and not ours. She says, bring the rifle. I say, obviously. That night I don't sleep well, and don't try very hard to. I go around the island at midnight, the way I've been doing for weeks, checking the perimeter, checking the bells, walking the South Beach barrier. The ice at the shore's edge is a thin skin now, not strong enough to step on. Just a suggestion. The lake is black. Pitcher Island is invisible in the dark, but I know where it is. I stop at the east ledge where Tom's boat first hit the rocks. The boat is still there, dried out, sitting on the gravel above the waterline. It's not worth taking. The hull damage Tom and Donna sustained from the crash was worse on the right side than I realized when I first assessed it. And with no access to proper materials, it's not repairable in any meaningful way. I've been cannibalizing it for things I can use. The navigation light, which I removed and stored. A fuel fitting that's the same size as my own outboard. The anchor and chain. The anchor and chain. I look at them. They're sitting in a coil near the door of the shed. 20 feet of half-inch galvanized chain and a 10-pound Danforth anchor. I pick up the chain and take it down to the dock and add it to the barrier there, running it as a second layer across the entrance, letting it hang in loops that will make a significant noise if disturbed. Small adjustments. You never stop making them. Inside, I check the rifle and the pistol and clean both, which I do every week. I read 2 more chapters of Howard's Volume 7. He's writing in February about the silence of the lake in winter and the specific quality of ice fishing, and the way he and his wife used to drive up to Vermont every January for a ski weekend, and how he thinks about that now when he's sitting above a hole in the ice with a tip-up over it. He makes me feel the cold of February through his writing, in a way I haven't been cold since it happened. I set the alarm function on the wind-up clock I have from the tool shelf, 0600. I put the clock in the loft and go up. I lie there and listen to the lake and the night, and in the very far distance, so faint I can almost convince myself I'm imagining it, the 3 short, 2 long from Pitcher Island, still going, still calling. The morning of day 61 is the clearest morning in 3 weeks. A sharp blue sky coming up from behind the east ridge, the kind of sky that says cold and clean, and the world is orderly from a distance. Temperature dropped to 22 overnight. The thin ice at the shore has thickened and spread, covering maybe the first 4 feet of the shallow water along the South Beach. The barrier posts stick out of it, looking permanent now. I run the wood stove full blast for an hour and make a real breakfast. 2 eggs I've been rationing, fried perch from yesterday's catch, rice with dried onion. I make enough for both of us without asking. Donna comes down the ladder and sees it, and doesn't say anything but eats with the seriousness the situation calls for. We load the John boat, which is holding well. The patch has been solid for 2 weeks now. With the rifle in its case, the pistol in my jacket, both radios, a day pack with water and food, and the first aid kit. I lock the cabin. I lock the shed. I lock the chain on the dock. The boat launch is 1.5 miles south, about 20 minutes in the John boat. I run the engine at half throttle, which is quiet enough to not carry far in still air, and we make it in 23 minutes. The boat launch is a concrete ramp, gated at the top with a chain-link fence and padlock, which was how it was before all of this. The gate is still padlocked, but there are signs of recent use. Tire tracks on the gravel parking lot on the other side, pressed into light snow from last week that hasn't melted. I tie up to the dock and we wait. Farlow comes at 0800, 20 minutes after the agreed time, which is either a power move or logistics. He comes in a pickup truck that's been modified in a way I can see immediately. Welded steel brush guard on the front, something over the wheel wells, the cab windows fitted with an interior steel mesh frame. A practical truck for driving through a world that sometimes puts things in roads that a normal front end handles poorly. He gets out alone. That's interesting. He's 50, maybe a little over. Solidly built, the kind of solid that's muscle going soft at the edges, the way men look when they were once very active and are now very busy. Dark jacket, work boots, baseball cap. He walks to the gate and looks through at us. He says, "Ray." I say, "Greg." He looks at Donna. She looks at him. He says, "I appreciate you coming out. I know you have no reason to trust me." I say, "Let's start with what you're building at Stanel." He talks for 20 minutes. He talks about Stanell Landing, a former National Guard armory complex about 12 miles south that he and a group of about 30 people had established in the first week of the outbreak and expanded since. They had cleared the surrounding area to a quarter mile and were running perimeter patrols. They had a generator system and a small fuel reserve. They had medical personnel, 2 EMTs, and a retired physician's assistant. They had people with farming backgrounds who were working on a winter food plan. 200 people, he said again, most of them families. He talks about the surrounding area. He knows the lake region well. He grew up in a town 15 miles from here. He knows which roads are compromised and which aren't. He knows where the infected concentrations are highest and where they're sparse. He's been thinking about what it means to expand from the armory into a wider network of satellite positions. He says, an island on a lake is exactly the kind of satellite position we'd want to establish, defensible by water, separate from the main compound, useful as a fallback position or a resource depot. I say, or a place people could live. He says, that too. I say, and what do you want from us specifically? He says, carpentry skills, medical knowledge. He nods at Donna. She's a biologist, you said. Donna says, biology teacher, high school. He says, that's more than we have. She says, what's your mortality rate at the settlement? He looks at her with something close to respect. He says, lower than outside, higher than we want. We lost 4 people in the first month to infection from wounds. Not zombie bites, just regular wounds that got infected without proper treatment. We lost 2 more to a gastrointestinal event that I think was contaminated water that our filtration didn't catch. He pauses. We have more children than I expected. Children get sick in ways adults don't. We could use someone who understands communicable disease. Donna says, I'm not a doctor. He says, I know. She says, I know some things about sanitation and disease vectors. I can help you set up protocols. I can't diagnose or treat individual cases beyond basic first aid. He says, that's better than what we have. I say, we're not moving to the armory. He says, I'm not asking you to move. I'm asking you to come see it. After that, we talk about what an arrangement looks like. I look at Donna. She makes a very small gesture with her head. Not yes or no. Proceed. I say, we'll come and see it. After that, we talk. Farlow nods. He says, there's one more thing you should know. I say, okay. He says, there's a group about 8 miles north of here that's been operating differently from us. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but we've had contact with 3 people who came from that direction, and every one of them was in rough shape and didn't want to talk about why. I'm not saying anything definitive. I'm saying the lake area is not a vacuum. There are people here, and not all of them are doing what we're doing. I file that. I say, understood. He says, when can you come? I say, give us 2 days to secure the island properly. He says, agreed. I'll have a vehicle at the boat launch at 0800 day after tomorrow. He extends his hand through the fence. I look at it a moment. Then I reach through and shake it. His grip is firm in the way that's a habit, not a performance. He gets in the truck and drives back up the road. Donna and I stand at the dock. She says, he didn't ask what kind of arrangement. I say, no. She says, that's either because he doesn't know yet, or because he does, and he doesn't want to say. I say, yes. She says, what do you think about him? I say, I think he's genuinely trying to build something. I think he's also the kind of person who builds things to his own specifications, and then has a hard time when they don't fit that. She says, that describes most builders. I say, yeah. We get back in the boat. I start the engine and we pull away from the dock and head back up the lake. The morning is very cold and very bright, and the lake around us is that specific shade of winter-approaching water, dark blue trending toward gray, with the ice beginning to form at the margins like the lake is slowly being hemmed. The island comes into view from about half a mile, a dark pine shape against the pale sky. It looks exactly as it always looks. It looks, From this distance and angle, like exactly what I built it to be, a place that stays standing. I slow the engine as we approach the dock, and I look at the island. The cabin, the shed, the dock, the trees. The bell chain that moves slightly in the wind, the smoke-stained stone chimney, the birch grove where the canoe is stored, and the roots where I've walked the perimeter in the dark so many times that I know the ground by foot memory now. Donna is watching me. She says, "We'll come back." I say, "I know." She says, "You can know that and still feel what you're feeling." I say, "What am I feeling?" She says, "I don't know." "What are you feeling?" I don't answer right away. I cut the engine the rest of the way, and we drift the last 20 feet to the dock, and I grab the piling and hold us there a moment without tying off, just holding, feeling the cold of the dock wood through my palm. What I'm feeling is something like the thing you feel when you've lived somewhere long enough that it becomes a part of the way you think. And then you contemplate that it might stop being the place you live and become a place you used to live. It's not grief exactly. It's more like the anticipation of it. I tie us off. We go up to the cabin. I unlock the door, and we go in, and the cabin is warm from the morning stove, and the lamp is on low, and Howard's notebooks are stacked on the table, and the bell chain makes its small sound from the dock. I start a second pot of coffee and sit at the table with volume 13 open, the page where Howard wrote about being careful on the radio, about giving the Stanell group his location, about not knowing if it was the best thing or the worst. I read that paragraph again. He came to an island because the signal-to-noise ratio had been pointing the wrong direction. He'd found the signal-to-noise perfect on Pitcher Island. And in the end, he'd tried to connect anyway because he was an engineer, and he believed in redundant systems, and one person alone, even a self-sufficient one, is a single point of failure. Donna sits across from me and picks up volume 8 and reads without comment. The shortwave is on low, Ohio, on his frequency, which has been steady for 2 weeks now. He says, isolated populations should assess connection opportunities carefully, but should also recognize that isolation carries its own risk categories. He says it with his flat voice, like he says everything. Isolated populations. That's me. That's been me for 61 days. I think about the 48 days before Donna arrived, when it was just me and the radio and the lake and the growing quiet. I think about Tom Hurley with his mechanic's hands, and his dog named Freight, and his yellow spinnerbait lure in the soft ground under the willows. I think about Howard Leck in his small shed on his small island, talking to machines until he couldn't anymore. I think about my sister, who I haven't been able to talk to in 2 months, and whether she made it out of Burlington, and what her voice would sound like if I could hear it right now. One person alone is a single point of failure. I know that. I've always known it. I built this place as if I didn't, because I wanted to be able to be alone and know what to do with it. I was right that I needed to know how. I wasn't right that it was the only thing I needed. We spend the 2 days securing the island. What this means is making it so that it can exist without us being here. The supplies moved to better positions, organized so that someone who didn't know the layout could find things in an emergency. The solar system checked and the battery bank topped up. The water barrels both full. The wood stove stocked. The boat put up in the best possible condition, with the engine oiled and covered, and the tank topped from the jerry can. I do something I've been avoiding. I write a log, a proper one, in one of the blank composition notebooks I had in the milk crate. Not the kind Howard wrote, not a document of my interior life, but a practical record. Date of arrival, current date, inventory, systems, what works and what doesn't, what I've learned about the water depth and the shoreline threats, and the perimeter of the island. If someone finds this place, they'll need to know these things. I write down Howard's frequency and the survey's schedule, and what I know about the Stanell group from Howard's notes. I write down the coordinates of Tom's grave under the willows. I write down his name. Donna watches me write for a while, and then she goes and writes her own section at the end, in her smaller, more precise hand. She writes a clinical assessment of the island's sanitation situation, the water filter maintenance schedule, what she knows about the lake water quality from the visible algae indicators, and the perch population health. Biology teacher to the end. On the last page before the back cover I write, "If you're reading this and Ray Corbin isn't here, his island is real. The water is potable after filtration and boiling. The solar system works. The wood stove flue has a weak joint at the second elbow that needs checking. The fish are good this time of year. The east ledge is the most vulnerable point. Watch the south beach in any sustained wet weather." I close the notebook and put it on the shelf above the door where someone would look first. On the morning we leave it snows. Not a heavy snow, just the first one. Light, dry. The kind that coats the dock boards and the porch railing, and the pine needles without accumulating fast. It turns the island quiet, in a way that's different from the lake quiet I've been living in. Snow quiet is padded, lake quiet is ringing. I stand on the porch for a while in the early morning before Donna wakes up. The snow is coming down at an angle from the northwest, hitting the porch roof in a soft, continuous sound. The lake is invisible past the first 50 feet of dock. Everything is white and gray and very still. I think about whether I'm making a mistake. I don't think I am, but I've been wrong about my own thinking before, and I'm not going to pretend that confidence is the same as correctness. What I know, 2 people on an island is not a community. What we've built here is real, and it matters. And it might matter more as a part of something than as the whole of something. And the specific feeling I have about leaving, the one that makes my chest sit heavy, is not the same as a reason not to go. Donna comes out with 2 cups of coffee. She hands me one and stands next to me, looking at the snow on the water. She says, "I don't think I've seen it snow on a lake before. I mean, I must have, but I don't remember it." I say, "It does something to the sound." She says, "The light too. It's like someone turned the contrast down." We drink the coffee. The snow keeps coming. She says, "I want to say something before we go." I say, "Okay." She says, "When Tom and I were trying to get to the boat, when it was bad in Garner's Crossing, I was more scared than I've ever been in my life. I had no idea what I was doing. I had a man who was hurt and I couldn't help him, and I didn't know how to drive the boat, and the engine was too loud, and I thought..." She stops, clears her throat. "When your island showed up out of the fog, I thought I was imagining it. It looked like something someone made up." I say, "It took a while." She says, "I know." A pause. "Thank you. For what you did for Tom. And for after." I don't know what to say to that. I say, "He was a good man." She says, "Yes." We stand there a few more minutes. Then I say we should go, and she goes back inside to get her pack, and I lock the cabin door and put the key under the 3rd dock board from the end. Old habit. I've been putting the key there for 6 years, and we load the boat. I start the engine. I untie. The boat pulls away from the dock, and I turn it south, and the island shrinks behind us. I don't watch it go. I watch the water ahead. The snow is still falling, and the lake surface is that particular texture that happens when fresh snow hits water that isn't quite cold enough to freeze, a disturbed flatness, and the sound of the engine carries back through the snowfall in a muffled, close way. After a few minutes, Donna says, without turning around, "The signal." I say, "What?" She says, "Pitcher Island. Are you leaving it running?" I think about it. 3 short, 2 long, still going. Howard's call for help, still broadcasting to whoever might hear it. I say, "I left it running." She says, "Okay." I say, "Someone should be able to find it, if they need it." We don't say anything else until the boat launch comes into view. The concrete ramp emerging from the snow water, the gate, the chain link. And in the parking lot behind the gate, Farlow's modified truck, engine running, a faint plume of exhaust in the cold air. I cut the engine, and we drift in. The island is behind me now, invisible in the snow. I tie the bowline to the dock ring and sit for a second with my hand on the motor housing, feeling the last of the heat it puts out as it cools. What I left back there, locked in the cabin and stacked on the table, and growing over the graves under the trees, a year of my life, give or take. The proof that I can make a place hold against the world when the world stops cooperating. 32 notebooks that belong to a man who understood that you can be alone and still be in conversation with something. A bell chain that rings when the water moves wrong. I'm not leaving it. I'm leaving it here. I step out of the boat. Farlow's camp is more than I expected, and less than he implied. The Armory complex was a National Guard facility built in the mid-70s. Solid concrete block construction, high fence, already designed with security as a baseline. Farlow's people have extended the perimeter with welded steel panels and additional fencing, and filled the gaps with vehicle bodies turned sideways. Not elegant, but serious. Inside the outer fence there are 3 main structures. The Armory building itself, which is now a dormitory and medical station, a vehicle maintenance shop, and a smaller building that serves as their operations center and storage. Between the buildings there's a cleared space that someone has started turning into a winter garden. Plastic sheeting over raised beds, a few leafy things still going under the cover. 200 people is not accurate. It's closer to 160, which Farlow acknowledges when I ask, saying that some people have moved on to other locations in the past few weeks. The settlement has that quality of something that's past the initial crisis period and is now in the harder, longer phase of figuring out what it actually is. We spend 2 days there. I walk the perimeter with Farlow on the first day and make notes on the things I'd do differently to the fortifications. I don't tell him in those terms. I make suggestions. He takes them well. He's the kind of organizer who's good at listening to people who know more than he does about specific things, which is a genuine skill, and not as common as you'd think. Donna spends both days in the medical station. She comes out at the end of the second day looking tired in a different way from usual. Not the tired of physical work, but the tired of thinking about difficult things. The tired of having been useful in a context that required seeing a lot of what the past 2 months had done to people's bodies. She tells me that evening, in the small room they've given us, that she thinks she can help them set up a proper water treatment protocol and a disease monitoring system, that she thinks 2 of the children have early-stage nutritional deficiency that nobody has identified as such, that the retired physician's assistant, a man named Paul Geary, is good but stretched thin and genuinely relieved to have someone to consult with. She says, "I want to stay for a while." I look at her. She says, "Not move here. Stay for a while. Establish the protocols. Teach Geary what I know about sanitation vectors. Get the water situation sorted. A month, maybe 2. I say, "Okay." She says, "What about you?" I say, "I can help with the fortifications." There are 3 things wrong with the outer fence that I saw in the first hour that could be fixed with materials they already have. And the building junctions are wrong. The way the dormitory meets the main structure, there's a gap in the sealant that's going to be a serious problem when the deep freeze comes. She looks at me for a moment. She says, "You sound like you've decided." I say, "I've decided to see what it looks like in a month." She says, "That's different from deciding to leave." I say, "Yes." On the morning of the 4th day, I take the boat back up the lake alone. I tell Farlow I'm checking on the island. He nods in a way that suggests he expected this, and doesn't push. I tell Donna I'll be back the next morning, and she says she'll have a list ready of things she needs from the island stores. The lake in late October is extraordinary in a way I don't have complete language for. The early ice is thicker now, pushing out from the shores, and the open water in the middle is dark and very slightly rough from a northwest wind. The boat pushes through it without complaint. The island comes out of the morning haze the same way it always has. I slow as I approach the dock, and I can see from 50 meters that everything is as I left it. The snow from 4 days ago is still on the dock boards, packed and icy at the edges. My boot print from the morning we left is still there, frozen in, next to Donna's smaller one. I tie up. I stand on the dock for a while. The bell chain makes its sound in the wind. Somewhere in the pines on the east side, a nuthatch is going about its business with that specific mechanical sound nuthatches make. The water moves against the dock pilings, a patient sound, a sound that's been happening here for longer than anyone has been paying attention to it. I walk up to the cabin. I unlock it. Key, still under the third board, exactly where I put it, and go in. Everything is exactly as we left it. The notebook's on the table. The lamp on low, because I left it on low. The wood stove cold, but the ash still there. I build a fire. I get coffee going. I sit at the table with Howard's notebook and my own logbook, and I add an entry to mine. Day 65. Island intact. No sign of disturbance. First thin ice extending 6 feet from south shore. Perch still active near north dock piling. Cabin structure solid. Everything holds. I sit there until the coffee is done, and then I pour a cup and take it out to the porch and sit in the chair that faces south, and I look at the lake. A few miles down the lake, past the boat launch, past the south shore where the vacation cabins are locked up for winter, 12 miles by road, 160 people trying to figure out what comes next. One island with a working water supply and a solid structure, and 32 notebooks full of an engineer's careful thinking about how to stay alive when you've decided to do it alone. On Pitcher Island, still going, Howard's signal. 3 short, 2 long. I sit on the porch until the coffee is cold, and then I go back inside and start taking inventory. I write down everything, careful and complete. What's in the cans, and in the buckets, and in the medicine cabinet. The propane levels, the tool inventory, the condition of the hull repair on the John boat, how much firewood is left in the lean-to, and how much I think we'd need to get through the rest of winter. When I finish the inventory, I go out to the shed and I start cutting wood. Not because I need it specifically, because the sound of the maul and the smell of fresh split pine and the clean difficulty of the physical work is the specific thing I need right now. I've always thought better when my hands have something to do. 6 years of building this place taught me that. 41 years of being myself taught me that. I split for 2 hours. The pile grows. The sound carries across the water, which means it carries further than I'd like, and after a while, I stop and stand with the maul and look at the lake and consider that. The sound of someone working, alive and working. I put the maul back and cover the new wood with the tarp and go back to the porch. The lake is getting dark. It goes fast in late October. The light just drains out of the sky to the southwest and takes the warmth with it. In an hour, it'll be fully dark. I'm going to stay tonight and leave in the morning. I said I would, and I will. There are things to bring back to the settlement and things to check on the island that need my actual presence, and I've done them. But there's also just this, the chair, the lake. The cold coming in from the north with the particular smell of a lake in late October, that rich undertone I was trying to identify on the first page of this. Not a storm smell, something else. The sound of the island, doing what islands do in the dark when there's nobody watching. I stay on the porch until I can't see the water anymore. Then I go in and close the door and lock it and climb up to the loft, which is cold enough now that I can see my breath, and I pull the sleeping bag up and lie there. Outside, the wind is picking up from the northwest, and the bell chain is ringing, not the alarm ring that means something is at the dock, just the ambient ring that means the wind is moving and the world is still going. I close my eyes. 3 short, 2 long. Someone set a machine to keep calling. I turned it off this afternoon, before I left. I climbed in the canoe and paddled out to Pitcher Island one last time, and I went into the small shed, and I sat beside the transmitter for a while, and then I shut it off. The lake went quiet in a way I hadn't expected. The kind of quiet that's different from just the absence of that specific sound. A fuller quiet, like the lake itself exhaled. Howard's call had been answered, as much as it ever could be. Not by the person he might have been calling, by whoever was next, which turned out to be me. I think I'll put it on a timer. 6 hours on, 18 hours off. Enough to be found by someone looking, not enough to draw every kind of attention all the time. A compromise between being findable and being safe, which is always the actual question. Howard would have called it a pragmatic solution to an information asymmetry problem. I'd call it leaving a light on. In the morning, I'll load the boat and go back south. The lake will be the same lake it's been for the entire time I've been here, doing what lakes do, cold and patient and deep in its middle, and shallowing at the edges. The settlement will be what it is, imperfect and trying. Farlow will be who he is, useful and complicated. Donna will have her list of needed supplies and her quiet competence, and her habit of turning a stick in her fingers when she's working something out. And this island will be here. Whatever I end up being in the next season of things, I built this. It holds. The timbers are mortised and tenoned without metal fasteners because I wanted to see if I still had it in me, and I did. The foundation posts are set in concrete below the frost line. The roof is pitched at 12 in 12, so the snow slides off without loading the rafters. I built this to outlast whoever builds it. That might be the most honest thing I know about myself. I sleep. Outside, the lake moves against the rocks, patient and cold, doing what it does in the dark when nobody is watching, which is the same thing it does when someone is. 3 short. 2 long. The wind in the pines above the cabin, where the snow is still sitting, not melting, waiting for more. A nuthatch sound in the morning, before I'm fully awake, mechanical and consistent. And then I'm up, and the stove needs lighting, and there's work to do.